Welcome to the International School Networks, or ISN's first roundtable discussion. I'm Max Humpston and run all things editorial, working with our expert contributors from around the world, launching this June. ISN is a new peer-to-peer network platform created so that educators working at international schools from around the world can share their thoughts and expertise with their colleagues and peers. Our mission is that ISN will be a safe space for international educators to contribute their ideas and expertise across a broad spectrum of topics to a global audience of like-minded peers. Ultimately, with the vision that this peer-to-peer knowledge sharing will have an incrementally positive impact in the sector. I'm delighted to be joined by two senior leaders in international education for this roundtable discussion. Sharon Gillette teaches social studies at the Asia American International Academy in Taiwan and has been working in education for almost 20 years, with the last 8 at international schools in East Asia. Her undergraduate and graduate degrees are both in history, and she holds professional certifications in history, integrated curriculum, and gifted education. In addition to teaching, Sharon has written articles for ABC Clear's 3-volume Daily Life of Women, an encyclopedia from ancient times to the present, collaborated on lesson plans published by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and has facilitated the development of students as historians at the school, affiliate, and national level as part of the National History Day programme. Sharon May is director of the Senior School for Dulwich College International. Prior to her current role, she was high school principal at the International School of Lausanne, following her tenure as head of middle school at Sha Tin College, ESF, Hong Kong. Prior to her overseas positions, Sharon taught philosophy and religious studies at Aquinas College, UK, and has continued to teach theory of knowledge and philosophy during her journey into senior leadership. A passionate advocate of innovative practices in student mental health, feedback, and assessment, Sharon has helped create dynamic student leadership models. She's also led the way in implementing professional learning communities in schools, partnering with educators to develop talent amongst colleagues, student autonomy, and self-management agendas. In today's roundtable, we will discuss the challenges and benefits of building a cohesive network between international school staff, students, and parents. We'll look at the importance and benefits of building strong networks and relationships, both within and across international schools globally. How can we develop genuine cohesion among staff, students, and parents during business as usual and during a crisis? We'll discuss the challenges therein and how we can take learnings over the last year to implement impactful incremental change across the sector. And without further ado, I think we'll dive straight into my first question. From your experiences, why is it important to create cohesion amongst staff and faculty within an international school? Sharon, would you like to take that first question?
Sure. I think oftentimes the staff members are from the local community, and they're the ones that help faculty members find accommodations, navigate the healthcare system, just the cultural wars of the community that you're moving into. And I found personally that the schools where there is strong staff faculty cohesion are the ones where I feel more part of the community.
Fantastic. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, it's probably the first time many educators have been in an intercultural environment, to Sharon's point, where you've got a kind of backbone of the school being a local staff, and then you've got many different kind of cultures to navigate within the staff room itself if you're an educator. And I think you have to plan really intentionally if you're going to keep everybody together in a multilingual, multicultural environment. So it's obviously quite a key tenet of international schools, I think, that we want to be as inclusive as possible and value diversity. So I think having a plan from the outset is absolutely vital to have that community flourishing, to reduce attrition rates, and to make sure that you keep a group of people belonging in a sense of community together for longer. I think it's one of the biggest challenges around in that sector.
Fantastic. Excellent. And prior to 2020 and the whole sort of COVID pandemic, what strategies did your institutions, or perhaps institutions you worked at previously, have in place to create a cohesive work environment or community for teachers and staff?
In some of the schools I've been in, they've arranged social events before school started or during the school year. The current school I'm at has a Christmas party. They have a street fair where the staff and the faculty, the parents, the students, everybody's interacting together, and that just kind of helps everybody feel comfortable with each other. The other thing is, it depends on how the office and the workspaces are set up. Schools where the office staff is separated from the faculty, there is less interaction, and I kind of feel like it kind of gets bogged down a little bit. So it's much better if we can be working in the same office spaces or share some office spaces together.
Yeah, I think that completely resonates with my experiences, Sharon, actually, and I think what we've tried to do is in past roles is try and activate people socially and emotionally so that they feel a sense of connection to one another. And it might be the way you set up a team meeting, or it might be a whole school meeting. And whether you use both languages or 3 languages, or the way you signal and represent each other, I think is really important. And students are often really, really good at this. And I think it's probably incumbent on us to try and mirror that great kind of thought and effort and creativity they put in. I think one of the great things I've seen as well is people sharing problems. So if you're a support staff member, you might also be working with an educator to solve a common problem, so that delineation just ceases to exist, and it kind of benefits everybody, and you're developing alongside each other. So completely agree with Sharon. It's about the physical side as well, being very visible.
That's really interesting. So almost, staff and faculty can actually look at how students interact and think, well, we can actually take learnings here and develop that into our own system as well. That's really interesting. And did you have any issues or struggles in developing this cohesion from a leadership perspective and from a teacher's perspective? Were there any issues before 2020 that you can think of?
I have been in a couple schools where, mostly larger schools, where the staff is segregated or divided away from where the faculty is. And it was much more difficult for me as a faculty member to get to know the staff people that I needed in my everyday life. So I think it's sometimes the size of the school. Sometimes it is really a language or a cultural barrier. I found more barriers in China than I have in Taiwan or Korea.
Interesting.
It's really interesting. I think you kind of triggered a thought process for me, Sharon, there, in terms of those invisible cues that get missed, that actually you think you're creating cohesion, and then when you dig under the layers, you actually realize that for a lot of people, they're not experiencing the same thing that maybe you think they are, or that they're feeling like they have to openly assimilate, but actually they're not sensing an acceptance, they're not sensing a parity. And I think it is quite a difficult problem to solve, and I've seen it in a number of areas, and I don't think it's something that you ever get right. I think it's something you work on continuously over the years, and you kind of reform that community all the time, particularly if it's transient. I suppose it's that plan to keep it alive. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Sharon.
Well, I do, because I see teachers who, only stay at a school for 2, 3, 4 years and they move on. So teachers seem to be cycling through schools all the time. And you said something about retention, and building this cohesive community, this caring community between staff and faculty helps teachers want to stay. If they feel accepted as part of the smaller community, they're going to be better accepted in the wider community also.
That's really interesting. Yeah, fantastic. And moving on from teacher and staff cohesion, why is it important to build community between students and indeed the parents of those students as well?
This is something that that's near and dear to my heart, because I really do feel like I'm a teacher. I'm also a parent. My own personal children are grown up, but I do feel like every student is kind of looking for some kind of validation of their feelings, or they want to be valued. They want to be listened to. And I think setting up a positive classroom culture from day one, where kids can share, students can share, and they feel comfortable sharing without feeling like they're going to be laughed at or, thought differently of. It's really difficult, I think, sometimes in Asia because of the male-female dynamic or the age dynamic, depending on what country you're in. But I just feel like it's really important to set that up from day one. And with parents, it's the same thing. The parents need to trust that the teachers are doing the best thing for their students. I find sending random positive emails the best thing. Try to do one positive email a week, and kind of try to hit most kids throughout the year. It's kind of nice.
That's really interesting. Fantastic. Sharon, what about yourself?
I think it's a really interesting question because actually for students, often they're navigating a really complicated identity. They're outside potentially of their home nation or they're outside of their local system. And I think they face different pressures. And I don't want to generalize about the third culture kid. I know there's a lot of talk about that with not necessarily lots of evidence around how we've looked at that as a term and whether students even want that label. But I would say it is very complex what they're navigating in terms of switching modes between worlds and switching modes between different generational expectations from maybe Western expat teachers to local teachers through to their parents. So I think it's absolutely vital that their peer group is really robust and strong and that they can depend on each other and support each other, particularly when we know we're often in high stakes environments and they're having to self-regulate and look after themselves and their mental wellness. I think there's nothing more that you want for a school than that cohesion for your students and them to feel proud to belong to the community. Likewise, I think to echo Sharon, with parents, you keep your parents very close if you can, because they're absolutely the cornerstone. They're the advocates. They can be the transformers of your community. Or, of course, they can actually maybe no longer be a partner, and the sense of alienation or isolation a parent can feel is very hard to retrieve once it's occurred. So I think it's always been intentional and proactive, and I love the email a week, Sharon.
It is a great idea. Do you think more sort of, frequent, smaller acts of this sort of cohesive nature is better than just sort of one grand, act maybe once a term to try and bring people together? It's just never going to work, is it? It needs to be consistent throughout the year.
It needs to be consistent. I think those once a term things are good in some ways. Like I mentioned, our Christmas parties and our street fair and things like that brings everybody out at one time. But like most parents, when I'll send these positive emails, they're like, I've never gotten a positive email. It's always like, your child's done something wrong, or your child's failing. So they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. So from a teacher's perspective, it actually makes you feel good too, because you feel like, you're helping that. And I always try to CC the student in the email too, so they know.
That's really, really great. I really like that as well. That's fantastic. That leads me on to the next question really nicely. Are there any other strategies that you had in place at your respective schools, prior to 2020 to help build those communities between students and parents as well?
My school currently hosts every grade level. We're grades 6 through 12. So they host a parent day or like a information session. It's usually 3 or 4 hours long for every grade level. We've had to move those into online meetings recently. Those are in person. So that's nice. They're in the school building. They get to see what's going on. We have a very, very active parent-teacher organization, PTA. I've also, in previous schools, we've done things like hosted health and wellness night, where a few teachers got together and had stations. So like I taught a little yoga class for grades kindergarten through 6th grade, and the kids just kind of rotated through with their parents. So it was a really nice way to get parents involved in what the kids are doing at school.
Fantastic. Well, what about yourself, Sharon, in your previous institutions?
I think in terms of student cohesion, I always look to, there's great work out there. Leah Waters does some amazing, really easy exercises for belonging that you can put in the hands of the students actually. So it's almost like a toolkit of them to be able to evaluate how they're feeling, evaluate the health of the community, and they can actually work towards improving where they think the community is. And they're not, by any means data driven. These are very human and quite meaningful pieces of work. So the University of Melbourne stuff is fantastic, and it's often available free to download. I would also put my hand up and say Design to Learn by Lindsay Portnoy is fantastic. It's full of great cognitive science. It's really simple devices that just activate people and make them feel part of something. Sharon, CCing the student, setting up a great conversation to happen between parent and student is just wonderful. So I think there's lots of great work out there and some great tips from colleagues. So soliciting these tips from colleagues is really important too. I think in terms of parents, often it's just establishing what norms your parents want and actually just partnering with them and working with them. And they come up with great ideas. I think Sharon's just pointed to different things that happen in different communities, driven by those communities and those teams of teachers who've been creative together. And I think that's the joy of it. You have intentional communications plans, but then there's lots of other things that just flourish because they're innovative and spontaneous. So I like to see a bit of both.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharon. And how has the last year challenged these strategies that you witnessed in place? And sort of looking in regards to school leadership, staff, students, and parents, as a whole.
Well, I would say just the general uncertainty of, when are things going to, are we ever going to get back to quote unquote normal? Yeah. For us here in Taiwan, we have been lucky until recently, and part of that was driven by the government really controlling things. So all the teachers at my school, we were not able to go home last summer. We haven't seen our families. I haven't seen my children, my mom in 2 years. Our students have really been impacted because they haven't been able to go and do college and university tours. And so they're applying, there's this list that they apply to of schools in the top 50 or whatever, but they really need to go and they need to experience, they need to see what the campus is like to see if they're going to fit in there. And I feel like that's a big unknown, what's going to happen with these two classes, the class of 2021, the class of 2020, especially. And I think the other big uncertainty is the changes in college admissions, especially in the United States, not using test scores or using test scores. That's going to be something that's going to have repercussions for years to come, I think.
Point, we found it twofold, very deeply personal impacts where there'll be, repair needed, but for each individual, depending on what they've seen and experienced, who they haven't had contact with and so on, how many peers they have and, how many siblings are in the house doing, the home-based learning, all those things have definitely had an impact. And then I think probably the interesting piece being the galvanization of those communities simultaneously. So whilst there's all these traumas occurring, simultaneously people are solutioning. So it's been quite a kind of discombobulating, I don't know if that's the right word, but a kind of interesting time of lots of unexpected ripple effects, and actually people doing the most extraordinary things in difficult circumstances, but being really aware that the repair is still vital to kind of get that community back on track. And I agree with Sharon, the uncertainty, what does back on track mean and look like? None of us really know yet. So I think there's been lots of discussion about hybrid and offline and online, and that's all great, rich discussion. However, these are reactive decisions. They weren't things that we planned for. These were not strategic aims 18 months ago. So people are still really feeling the effects of those.
Absolutely. And I suppose how, with this sort of the trauma over the last year, how have your schools adapted the strategies you had in place to sort of try and accommodate for the last 12, well, more than 12 months now?
Yeah, we in Taiwan, we had 3 weeks of online learning back in March or April of 2020, right after Chinese New Year. And it was chaos. And like, my hat's off to some of these teachers who have been teaching online since then. I don't know how they did it. But because of that experience, our school came together and was like, okay, we need to have something in place in case we have to go into lockdown again. And so they revamped, they streamlined, they put some things in place where our middle school students, our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students have 7 classes a day or 8 classes a day. And we're like, oh, no, that's like too much. So we divided it into an A day and a B day just to kind of give them a little bit more structure, but like less work to focus on every single day. So the conscious decisions were made at the admin level and at teacher level. Like, we had a practice being online this year. So we'd be sitting in front of our classroom, like, and we're one-to-one, like, okay, pretend you're at home, everybody log in, we're gonna have the Zoom meeting, we're gonna do this. And this is what it's going to look like. So that was really helpful, seeing we're in lockdown now for the last couple weeks. The kids have adapted much more quickly this time.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think similar experiences in Dulwich. Heads of college did exactly what you described, which was kind of streamline strategy, remove anything that was a roadblock, and kind of start to give people very practical help if they needed access to apps, headsets. We've all been through all these different changes of setting up our workstation at home just to feel comfortable. And I think clearly strategies going forward are going to be much leaner and much more focused, actually. And the frenetic pace of most international schools, I think, deserves some reflection at this point. We do a huge amount. We don't do schooling, we do education, and we offer almost everything as a hub to the community. So I absolutely can see those reflections happening. And like you, Sharon, we played with the timetable. We had a few iterations that worked, a few iterations that we wanted to tweak. And actually what I realized was that a lot of the content we're giving students or time online, we just didn't need. And doing a lot of asynchronous work was just much healthier for everybody. You need to catch your breath and think. I think all of us are in the community, so completely echo everything you've said.
Fantastic. And what tangible learnings do you think we can take from the last year in order to build better cohesion amongst staff and faculty, and indeed students and parents? Are there things that we can learn from to have an even better cohesive experience for them?
I really believe that it's important that we check in with each other. And that goes on all the different levels. The student, teacher, admin, teacher, staff. Really check in with each other and make sure people are okay. And to facilitate communication. Like, get rid of some of the superfluous communication things that we have to do, or some of the added tasks, so we can communicate clearly to all the constituents that are in our schools.
Completely agree. Simple, straightforward. It's very clear what everyone's purpose is. It's clear what everyone has to deliver. And that's clear for parents in their role, students in their role, and educators. I think the simplicity has been one of the benefits. If we can get there and keep that position and hold our nerve, I think it would be positive for the profession as a whole. And I think the level of professional learning has been just an explosion for people. People have just adapted tech, adapted all kinds of pieces of their work at such a rapid rate. And it's not that learning isn't incredible, extraordinary and laudable and admirable, but there comes a time where there is a cognitive overload, and just understanding that people need drip feed and they need to probably be able to lead and have some autonomy in their professional learning. As opposed to these huge bursts that people have been exposed to and just had to consume really on the run.
Fantastic, thank you. And I suppose looking more towards inter-school cohesion, what would you say are the benefits of building networks between schools? So not only with staff within the same school, but across schools and school groups even?
It's been my experience that international education kind of leads naturally towards networking. When you get involved in programs like National History Day or Model UN, you're already reaching out to other teachers in other schools. And then because of the attrition rate of international educators, when we move from school to school, we end up having, I have friends all over the world. I have friends in Africa, I have friends in South America, Asia, and Europe. And we still contact each other. We still talk to each other. We still like, hey, remember that activity we did? Can you send me like the paperwork for it? Because I want to revamp that. So I think it's a natural thing for international schools. I think it's really important to maintain those contacts with people that we've met in other places, to share best practices, to celebrate successes, but also to be there for each other in challenging times like this last couple of years have been.
Absolutely.
I think it's natural, as Sharon said, but I just think it's critical to the future of the whole international sector. I think it's really important that when we're in the same position as we have been for the last 15 months, that people are able to seek out coaches from another school and actually talk very openly about the experience they're having and have a kind of critical friend to be able to offer support and offer the ideas and, you know, the practice that Sharon just mentioned. I've emailed people and said, can we jump on a Zoom and just kind of talk something through with you? I think it's a good plan, but I just need another opinion. And actually we've completely revamped it by the end of the call in light of what they're experiencing somewhere else in the world. So I think it's critical, and I think for mental health, for collaboration, for all those positives about being an educator, it's the basis, I think, of all learning, I think, to increase the network.
Fantastic. And my final question, how can this cohesion between schools be developed further going forwards?
I personally would like to see more opportunities for teachers and staff and admin to collaborate in professional development face to face. And I know we've entered this new era of online professional development, online learning and stuff, but nothing beats that face to face, that networking. You know, sitting in a room, you know, as a history teacher with a bunch of other history teachers is just amazing experience. And it would be great to be able to get together again. I think that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see, there's not enough international education collaborations that would allow us to all come together in one place. You know, everybody meet in Singapore, everybody meet in Taiwan or Thailand or wherever. We only tend to do that when we're going to job fairs now. Yeah. And, you know, that's not really, you know, we could be doing so much better.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I think it's an interesting point, Sharon, because actually, you know, outside of AirClass, COBIS, CIS, we're all familiar with all the big conferences or IB. Actually, the meaningful face-to-face collaboration, you're quite right, wasn't there before this for most educators. I don't think it was a possibility. I suppose it's interesting to think about, even within the city I'm speaking from now in Singapore, there are educators who I don't know, and I haven't necessarily sought them out. And I probably could have really rich discussions on my doorstep when regulations allow, that would probably benefit maybe them and hopefully us in terms of just shared experiences. So I think it's a good aim to have, but I think probably we could also be a lot more proactive. I think it's a natural tendency to collaborate, but I think people also have quite well-worn networks that maybe they use, and sometimes it's daring to just reach out, and also to industry and NGOs and tertiary partners, and not limit ourselves just to other schools. I think there's so many people interested in the future of education that they're always really interested to respond and support.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to maybe mention on that, or is all good? Fantastic.
I think that getting other people involved, like you said, tertiary parties, NGOs, and anybody that's really interested in the state of education, which should be like everybody on the globe, on the planet, right? And really making it a partnership. And instead of like school versus school, which we tend to do in the international community, right? Instead of like, you know, we're better, let's work together and all be better.
I agree.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sharon and Sharon, for joining today's roundtable discussion, and indeed Education Perfect for inviting us to take part. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to welcoming hopefully more members to the conversation as part of the International Schools Network.
Well, thank you for having us. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolute pleasure.